Hey friends, welcome back to Zach and Brian Watch the Watchmen. I'm Brian, he's Zach. We're going to be talking about the fourth episode of Watchmen, the HBO television series today. It is called If You Don't Like My Story, Write Your Own. And as always, we're going to be discussing spoilers, so if you haven't watched it yet, stop the podcast, go watch it, and come back. We should also say, although we love Damon Lindelof, we are now in direct competition with him, Zach, because he's launching a Watchmen podcast.
Oh no.
And so we're going to have to take down Damon Lindelof. I'm sorry, Damon.
Oh man, I guess we'll never get him on the podcast.
I guess so. Yeah, we'll see. Anyway, I got my coffee. I'm feeling good. Let's dig right into this. So, the episode begins with a scene that felt very much like the beginning of the second season of Lost, when Desmond is in the hatch, and we don't know it's the hatch at the time, and Mama Cass's Make Your Own Kind of Music was playing. Instead, here we get Islands in the Stream, and we get to see a lovely tale of two egg farmers. Is that the right word for them? Egg? You don't really farm eggs. They're chicken farmers?
Well, I mean, I guess you kind of do.
Yeah.
I think it fits.
Okay.
Eggman.
Eggman. Yes, there we go. Which this song Eggman was played by the Beastie Boys at the end of episode 2. We can throw a Beatles analogy in there. Lots of music to Eggman. Anyway, so but we see them kind of living their day-to-day lives, and they're going to bed, and their doorbell rings. And who's at the door, Zach?
It is Lady Trieu.
Now, this is the first we've seen of her, but we heard her mentioned last episode.
Right.
With the Millennium Clock. And how would you describe? Well, how is she described by the folks that she is intruding upon?
I mean, she's very mysterious.
They call her a billionaire.
Kind of eccentric. Yeah.
And she
she's
corrects
wealthy.
them. She says she's a trillionaire.
Yeah. She's fairly eccentric, I think, or seen as eccentric in the community. Yeah. I'm trying to think of like another kind of like media character who would fit that bill, but nothing's really coming to mind right now.
I mean, she's almost Howard Hughes-ish.
Sort of. Yeah.
She says that, that people say that she doesn't go out, but that's not true. She just goes out when it's important, which implies that this conversation is going to be very important. And so she offers $5 million to this family to sell her their farm right now. And,
right. And she has a clock running as she does it.
Yes.
Hourglass.
An hourglass. I was going to say, not just any clock, a very dramatic hourglass.
Yeah.
And she says that she wants it, and $5 million should be more than enough to renegotiate. And then she gets into this conversation. She says, I know that this farm has been in your family for X amount of years, and that you see this as your legacy, but it's not. Your legacy is not held in property. It's held in children. I just want to pause here for a second and say that this is essentially the Jewish understanding of legacy and the Jewish understanding of heaven as understood sort of in the early days of the Jewish exodus from Egypt. That a lot of times when they're talking about sort of what legacy means for Jewish people, it was at the time very much built on extending your family line, and that was the most important thing, is to have family. So that's not really all that important to the conversation of the episode, but I found it interesting and I wrote it in my notes.
It is interesting, and I think like the concept of legacy in comics is very important. So
yes,
and even in Watchmen is important too. So
yes, and so Zach, what does she offer them in addition to the $5 million?
Oh, didn't you already say that?
No, I didn't.
I thought you did.
No, she says the family is important and children are important, but
oh, okay. I thought you said it.
Yeah.
So
Nope.
she offers them a baby, not just any baby, their own baby.
and not a hypothetical baby. She's already made the baby.
Yeah, which I thought I already, something along the lines of I already did it. Again, kind of an Ozymandias callback.
Yes. And the baby is not a newborn. That baby wasn't
No.
born today or yesterday. That baby was born a while ago, which means that this
Yeah.
plan had been in place for quite some time.
Yeah, so we find out why she wants the house and the land, and it's because she knew something was going to happen ahead of time.
Yes, we'll get to that in 1 second. But at first, the wife of this couple is just aghast at this idea. She says, "Get out of my house," and the husband is very taken aback by this idea. And then they get to hold the baby, and you just see that you see it's a really well acted scene. Actually, you see in like less than a minute these two people completely change their minds about this, and you see them start to fall in love with their child and then race to sign the papers in time. And
Yeah,
it's a pretty harrowing scene to watch, though.
it's intense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so after they sign this, they begin to hear this loud noise. They go outside and they see a meteor or something that appears like a meteor crash onto their property. And when they ask, "What is that?" she says, "That is mine."
It's
A pretty cool
it's
introduction.
it's Kal-El.
It is Kal-El. I mean, I think we're all supposed to think that, right? I mean, that's the illusion. Like there's this meteor crashing on a farm of a childless couple.
Yeah, actually, I was joking. I hadn't really even made that connection, but it is 100%.
And that's after we
Yeah,
get the Kal-El leaving Krypton scene in the first episode of
right.
Will
Yeah.
being put in there. So it's very interesting to see how that works
It,
together.
it is really interesting. Yeah, maybe we're gonna get that Doomsday Clock. That's season two.
Yeah, season 2 will just be a straight Doomsday Clock adaptation. Oh goodness gracious me. Okay. So we'll get a little bit more Lady Trieu later in this episode. Um, but what was sort of your overall first impressions of the character?
She felt very much like a lost character, 100% to me. She like fit in really well with kind of like the Dharma Initiative feel of being very aloof and having way more knowledge than everyone else, and kind of a maybe a bit of a devil may care attitude. Her style of dress was very interesting. Um, she doesn't seem like a terribly likable character at first, because she's benevolent, but she's manipulative.
Yes, yes, and as this episode goes on, I don't know how much more likable she gets,
Yeah.
but we'll talk about that in a little while. Um, so after this scene, we begin to catch up with Angela, I believe, and we see Angela. She calls in. She says basically, "Did anyone hear a silent alarm go off at the cultural center?" The dispatcher says no. She says, "All right, well, there's some broken glass. I'm gonna go in and check it out." And then you see her essentially break into the cultural center to try and get some more information. And so we see her go to one of those kiosks that we saw her use in the past, and she sees Henry Louis Gates Jr. You can call him Skip, and she collects an acorn, which is basically this prop that you put into this other hologram machine. I don't even know, hologram projector.
Yeah, yeah.
And it projects your family tree, and it's showing her the new information about her family tree that's been revealed, and that is sort of the institution, not the institution, the revelation of Will and his parents. And so she gets to see a photo of her great grandparents. Will's name has been lost to history, but we know his name is Will, and yeah, we get a little bit of Angela sort of talking to Will's hologram, and I have to say this is my least favorite scene in the whole series so far.
Interesting. I mean, I don't think it's particularly great or anything, but why is your least favorite?
I just felt that, first of all, a sort of theme that we're going to see emerging is just Angela taking matters into her own hands at times, and we've seen that already. You know, we saw her beat up that Seventh K member in the pilot episode. So you know, we see her go outside the law a little bit here, but this seems like something she could have easily done during the daytime, and it would have had no negative impact whatsoever. Like, people aren't going to be watching her, and even if they were watching her, nothing about what she sees is particularly, bad or revelatory or anything.
Noteworthy,
Yeah, and so
yeah.
it seems like she went and put herself in danger to do this, and then we get her talking to the hologram, and that just seems like a bridge too cheesy for this show.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think when you are watching it, it's maybe not as far fetched as it initially as when you actually like really think about it. Because I think you can kind of get in her mindset. You know, she's not quite on the lam yet, but she is under scrutiny, and she's hiding evidence, and she's being a little sketch, and
Yeah,
maybe that is her mindset here that's causing her to act irrationally, or maybe it's just kind of a poorly uh, concepted, sequence, just to, just being a little bit more dramatic than is necessary.
yeah,
Because it is definitely more interesting than if she had just gone to the center and done all of that, I think.
sure,
Um,
sure. I can't really
yeah,
argue with that, I guess.
yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, we get and after that, we see her meet up with Agent Blake again as her car has fallen from the sky, and Lori continues to be wonderful in that she is totally nonplussed that it turns out to be Angela's car. This car falls out of the sky, and Angela's like, "That's mine." She's like, "Okay, well, you have this under control now, so peace." Um, but anyway, so we're coming up on a scene that I think you and I are going to have a lot to say about, and that is the scene in Angela's house where she's talking to Cal about, or rather, she and Cal are getting breakfast ready for the kids. And
um,
did I skip a scene?
well, there was a scene, at least in my order of notes, that I did want to mention really quick. This scene with Angela and Topher, where Angela comes in, very
Oh yes,
late.
I'm sorry. Yes, let's talk about
Cal,
that. Go
Cal's
ahead.
as, Cal's asleep with the girls, and so she goes and gets in the bottom bunk in Topher's room, and they have a conversation that like almost had me in real tears, because it was just pretty powerful. I think it ends with Topher giving Angela his like stuffed animal or something to
Yes,
comfort her,
yes,
um, which is really sweet, considering how kind of like he's a pretty calloused kid,
right. But it's a nice reminder that he's a kid.
Exactly,
Yeah,
yeah.
that you're right. I did skip over that in my notes. That is an excellent scene, and we just I really like the relationship that we're seeing between Cal and Topher.
Mm-hmm.
They have this really, they've both been through some shit, and they're both really hardened by it, but they're also very protective of each other. Like, the first time
Mm-hmm.
that we see Topher, we see him beating up a kid because he made a what he considered to be a racist remark at Angela. And so, we've just seen him a number of times now really taking on this sort of protector stance for his adopted mother. And I think it's a really beautiful relationship they've built.
Yeah, I agree.
But anyway, so the next morning, Cal and Angela are making breakfast, with Cal doing the heavy lifting, making waffles here for the kids, and the kids are arguing about whether or not Uncle Judd went to heaven. And Cal sits down and basically just delivers the most plain spoken, cold denial of the existence of an afterlife that you could probably ever imagine. Um, not he's not mean about it. He's actually rather calm while saying it. He basically says, before Uncle Judd was born, he was nothing, and then he was here, and now he's nothing again. There is no heaven. That's not real. Who wants waffles?
Yeah, and Angela is taken aback by this a little bit. You get the sense that they haven't really maybe even ever had this conversation, and it's actually, based on how their characters are portrayed, I would kind of expect them to for their reactions or beliefs to be swapped a little bit. Angela is kind of the more no nonsense, practical one, and Cal seems to be the more nurturing, the more nurturing one. And so it's interesting that their takes are kind of they come across the way that they do.
Yes. I wonder if, so one of the things that I was curious about watching that scene was, do you think that, we had talked about in a prior episode sort of the idea of the lack of innovation caused by Dr. Manhattan's, both his sort of appearance on the scene and then also with everything that happens with Veidt. Do you think that Dr. Manhattan's appearance would lead to I don't want to say a surge in atheism, because I don't think that atheism is exactly on the decline right now. But do you understand what I'm saying? Like, do you think that would affect how people approach belief?
I would honestly maybe expect it to just polarize it more. Like, I feel like it would just kind of radicalize. I feel like it would make the ends of the spectrum more extreme and then kind of create a sense of apathy in the middle. And that's kind of maybe how I would expect it.
That's interesting. I wonder if, because Dr. Manhattan we don't know how public, we even in the Watchmen comic, we don't know how public he is with his opinions, with anything like that. So we don't know, he sort of expresses no belief in a god.
Yeah.
We have no idea if he would have, quote, gone public with that or not. So I don't know if this is a matter of people like listening to Dr. Manhattan so much as just when presented with the evidence that is Dr. Manhattan, it might be hard to go back and think about things in a more mystical way. Does that make sense?
Sure. I guess like the way I mean is like I feel like just his presence is either going to. I feel like there's going to be like groups on both sides who are just going to double down harder on their own beliefs as just kind of a way of grappling with reality.
Okay.
But then I think kind of faced with at least like, I mean, the question of like, is there a higher power? Obviously there is, and it's at least Dr. Manhattan. And so like his existence is either going to like, I mean, it's hard to deny the existence of some kind of power, but because it's so tangible and in some ways like mundane now, it almost I would think I would expect it to create a sense of apathy.
And also explainable. Like one of the
Yeah.
one of the great debates around the belief in God is that you cannot prove the existence of God, and you cannot, I know people who would ask questions like, well, what was God doing before creation? Who created God? Like, if you can answer all those questions, it takes some of the
Well, it kind of removes the aspect of faith.
absolutely, and not only that, it also, we tend to think that God wants us to do good, or at least most religions believe that, God wants people to be good and to work for the betterment of the world. And not that Dr. Manhattan doesn't believe that, but he doesn't believe that for any altruistic purpose, really.
Right.
So, yeah, it's just an interesting question. I think that scene is a very, very interesting one, and one that I don't know will get another scene like it in the course of the show, but I'm glad we got that one scene. I found it very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's good that we got it. I don't know that we necessarily need more. I mean, I loved when Leftovers tackled themes of religion and faith, and that was very, that show definitely leaned or lent itself to those kinds of conversations a lot. I don't know. I mean, I guess Watchmen in some ways does as well, but I don't, like you said, I don't necessarily expect to get more of that than what we're getting.
Right.
But we'll see.
By the way, I have something very Leftovers related to talk to you about, but because we have listeners who haven't watched The Leftovers yet, we'll have to save that for after the podcast. But
Okay.
yeah. So so after this scene with Cal and the breakfast, we see Angela brings the bottle of pills that were left in her car. She found them in her car again that belonged to Will, and she brings him over to Looking Glass's house, and she asks him to, quote, have his ex look at them. And what does Looking Glass do when we see him, Zach?
Oh, what does he do? I don't remember.
He's developing photos of the squid
right.
fall.
Oh, that's right. Because she goes to meet. For some reason in the scene, I was thinking they were meeting in the police department, but no, she goes to meet him in his kind of weird little doomsday prepper.
Yes, in his
shed.
bunker. Yeah.
Yeah, in his bunker. That's right. Yes, yeah. So exactly. So he's yeah, like you said, developing photos of squids, and you see this weird little bunker that he has with all of his supplies and his bunk beds, and you kind of maybe get an idea for why his ex is his ex.
Yes, absolutely. He says something like, poor little guys, like, live for 30 seconds and then die.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that Looking Glass is very interested in the squid fall and sort of why it's happening. And this is not a spoiler, but we're going to get a Looking Glass centric episode coming up pretty soon. And it answers it. A lot of that episode is very informed by what we see here.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I don't need to cut that out, do I?
I don't think so.
Okay, good. All right, so then we get the weirdest scene in the show so far, and
that's really saying something.
It is saying, but is it not the weirdest episode in the show so far?
Yeah, no, it definitely is.
Okay, so Angela is disposing of the pieces of Will's wheelchair so that she cannot be found out that she had it. And as she is dumping, she's on a bridge and she dumps the last bits into a freight train that is going underneath the bridge. And she turns around and looks, and there is a vigilante dressed in a full body, like, sleeve? What do we call those things? You know what I'm talking about.
Body condom. I don't know.
Yeah,
I just
exactly,
said
yes.
my exact note for this was WTF shiny man.
Okay, yeah. So he's in a shiny. He has kind of bug eyes, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think so.
And then he just takes off running. Angela starts following him, and so they're running, and then
he has a belt.
Yes, sorry. Talk about the belt. Yeah.
Well, so he has a belt that has kind of like almost kind of like what you would think of as just kind of like standard ketchup mustard bottles, but they're clear, and they have some kind of liquid in them, and that liquid seems to be some kind of oil because he pulls out 2 bottles, squirts them all over his body as he's running, and then just slides into
a sewer,
a storm drain. Yeah.
And then when it's over, Angela literally goes, "What the fuck?" And
Yeah.
that's how we all feel. So I do want to say things. To me, there are two very obvious candidates for who this might be. The first is Petey, because he is certainly that tall, lanky type fella. The other is you lanky motherfucker.
It could be me. It could be me. I almost expect that this is something that is never touched on again ever, and it's just like a picture of how weird the world is now.
I had a very similar thought. I could see this either being very important or not important at all.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, me too. Me too. If it is just like weirdness for weirdness sake, I am all in on that. Some of my favorite things in like Twin Peaks are just the like 2 minutes of a man sweeping. And this I think, even if its purpose is just to show the state of the world, I think that's very good.
Yes. I also think it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if it was Petey.
Mm-hmm.
We know he's obsessed with vigilantes. So for him being one himself wouldn't be that out of character. But I don't think it's him, because this person would have to have a pretty good sense of sort of Tulsa geography, like to know where the sewer would be and all of that.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, just very interesting to see this, to talk about this scene.
Yeah.
And super weird. So then we see Angela and Agent Blake and Petey getting in their car to go to Lady Trieu's. I guess we'll just call it the Millennium Clock. There's more than that there, but let's just call it that. It is in that car ride where Blake basically tells Petey to explain who Agent Blake is. Which, did that strike you as odd that people wouldn't know who she was?
Not necessarily. Just because, I mean, it has been like 30 years. And I mean, just thinking about, I don't know.
I've gone back and forth.
I think it's, I don't, yeah, I don't think it's unbelievable. I guess I'll say. I think it is like reasonable that some people would maybe have blind spots, and like maybe especially, Angela growing up in Vietnam, maybe she wasn't as inundated with kind of like mainland American culture and everything. So I mean, I think it's explainable. I don't think it didn't strike me as particularly unbelievable. But I do see what you mean.
Yeah, I don't really know. On one hand, I feel like at least, I mean, I guess we also don't know like how much the news of Night Owl and Silk Spectre coming back into the forefront in '85 would have been.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it would have been. It was essentially just like one night, really.
Right. Yeah. So,
and then after that, they kind of go off the grid again. You get the impression until apparently whatever may have happened that put them on their current paths.
Right.
Yeah, you would expect maybe that to be a little bit more high profile and actually more recent, which that kind of does begin to like strain the credulity of that. But until we really know what that is or what happened, it's kind of hard to say.
Right. But so, Petey says Agent Blake was one of the Minutemen, and Angela says, like, on that show, and he says that show is garbage or trash. I think he says, I forget, it's garbage or trash. Whatever he says, it's hilarious. It's good. But that's all prefacing getting us to Lady Trieu's sort of HQ here. How would you describe this place, Zach?
It's basically like the Avengers play, like their compound in the most recent Avengers movies.
Except with the interior being the outdoors of Vietnam.
Well, just Lady Trieu's quarters.
Yes.
Mostly,
Yes.
like I guess I was thinking specifically of when they get there and they come into this like big hangar area where you have these kind of like uh aircraft with giant turbine engines and that sort of thing. I guess that's what I was more alluding to. But then then you go to Lady Trieu's area, which is she I think she says that she made a promise to her parents that she would never leave Vietnam, so she brought it with her.
Yeah. Um, and we should say the reason that they are here is because they're investigating the potential for one of their drones to have picked up Angela's car and stolen it.
Yes, yeah.
Um, and everyone at Lady Trieu HQ seems more than happy to cooperate, although you get the impression that they're probably bullshitting on some level. Everyone is very polite and very sort of phony about everything, or at least that's how it appears. But we do see a young girl who we had seen before. We saw her picking up newspapers in the second episode. We see her here again, and it turns out this is Lady Trieu's daughter. And
Yes.
She is what, maybe 10-ish, 12 maybe.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Yeah.
And she seems to have a very prominent position in the hierarchy there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think she even alludes to something like usually Lady Trieu makes people go through just kind of lower level assistants and things like that, but for her to send her daughter is kind of a very special thing.
Right. And then we get to see Angela and Blake meet Lady Trieu. And Petey goes to follow, and he is told ladies only.
Yeah.
All right, so we see Angela and Lori welcomed into Lady Trieu's sort of inner sanctum, and she mentions that that this is her Vietnam, etc. And then she hands over the names of anybody who might have been able to operate this those machines, and she says to Angela she's very sorry to hear about the chief's death. She hadn't met him, but she's heard that he's a good man. And she then shares an old Vietnamese proverb about grief, which is, your grandfather is here and wants to know if you got the pills, in Vietnamese.
Yeah. That scene was so good. Really quick, I don't mean to go on a tangent, but you talking about Judd being a good man made me remember a line that I did want to mention from when Angela goes to see Looking
Yes.
Glass.
Yes, we forgot the big line. Yeah.
The big line.
We've been texting about this line.
Yeah. So I can't remember. I think she flat out tells Looking Glass that she found a Ku Klux Klan robe
and then
in
she gives it to him.
in his closet. And she gives it to him to hold on to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she says something like, did you know he was racist or anything like that? And and Looking Glass says he was a white man in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Of course, essentially, of course he was racist.
Right.
Which I feel like is going to be a line that is going to be very controversial once it gets out into the wild. Do you think that's a pretty fair take?
Yeah. We're still recording this. We're recording this 2 days before the third episode airs.
Yeah.
And so we're still way ahead of sort of the release schedule here. So we don't know how that line is going to go over, which is funny. I think that the people who will be offended by that line are the racists in Oklahoma. Because I think that somebody who's not racist in Oklahoma will look at that and say, like, oh, I know that they're talking about my neighbors, and the folks who are racist in Oklahoma are going to say, hey, they're talking about me.
Well, it's very interesting. I guess if any of my friends are listening to the show, I do have friends who live in Oklahoma or from Oklahoma and are white, who I have had a lot of discussions about race and racism and all of those things, and we don't necessarily see eye to eye. And so I think I have like very real examples of like how this is going to be met in the world, and I think that I think Looking Glass's point is, I mean, I personally like can I identify with it and agree with it.
I mean,
I think it's going to spark a lot of conversations about what racism actually is, which is like still a conversation that is not. It's a term that's not agreed upon. It's something people aren't comfortable talking about.
well, that's what I was going to say. Is I think that you could possibly expand it even further and say he was a white man in America.
Yeah, you really can, honestly. Like, and that, you know, no one wants to be called a racist, but because of that, no one is able, very few, and I'm like not saying that I'm so special or like woke because I can talk about things in this way, like not at all. There are tons of ways that I don't recognize my own, you know,
Bias,
privilege and
privilege, all that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, all those things definitely, but like I think white people in America have to start grappling with these things in this way, and like for such a mainstream show to be tackling it and approaching it, like I think it's a good thing. I just don't know how it's going to be received.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I would never identify myself as racist, right? I would hope
Right.
that I am not that person. But I think
Yeah.
that just, I'm a 37-year-old man who grew up in the United States of America. There is some racism baked into me. And
For sure,
I try
exactly.
my
Yeah.
best to not lean into that or to educate myself and remove it from myself, but I don't know if that's even possible. There will always be a part of me that was raised a certain way, and this is not a knock on my parents or my education or any of that. It's just the reality of being born when and where I was. And so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
this got deep, man.
It did. It did. It's hard. I mean, it's really hard, and that's why I mean, this show is good, I think. It's like
Well, and that's actually, let's take a quick pause here before we get into the Vietnamese discussion here, because one of the things that I keep texting you. So I saw the 6 episodes before you saw any of them,
yeah.
and whenever you watch one, you text me your reaction, and what do I always text you back?
The show is good.
Yes, because I think in the beginning we were very unsure as to what, even after the pilot, it was interesting, but was it good? But I think I am ready to draw my line on the sand here and say this show is good.
Yeah,
Are you ready to do the same?
yeah, no, I really am. I think that it is good. I think that it is I don't I'm not going to say what I was going to say.
No, come
it's
on.
too spicy a take.
No, no,
Um
dude, we need spicy. We're competing with
uh,
Lindelof. We have to go spicy
I
now.
I there are times, and this is way too underbaked, and the show's not even over yet, but there are times when I think that maybe this show is like maybe more important than the comic.
Wow. Okay.
I think it maybe says more important things than the comic does, and is going to say more important things than the comic did.
That is a spicy take.
Yeah.
But not an incorrect one. Um so our pal Greg Matasevich, co-host of Robots from Tomorrow, one of the true good guys in the world, had reached out to the two of us to talk about this show because he's seen the first 2 episodes now, and Greg is a big. I think Greg would bristle at me calling him a big Watchmen fan because I think that Greg recognizes the sort of what that says about somebody. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
But Greg has a really smart and nuanced appreciation of Watchmen and of just sort of the comics climate. If I have a question about where something fits into comics history, Greg is the guy I go to because Greg is
Hmm.
just he's really good with that, and he's enjoying the show. And we were talking about how the show didn't need a sequel. I mean, the book didn't need a sequel, but giving itself one in the form of a TV show, this is essentially the best of what you could have hoped for, and I
Hmm.
really do feel that way.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely do. It's way better than I could have ever hoped for.
Yeah. And again, this is not a spoiler. This is a tease for folks. episodes 5 and 6 are amazingly weird and interesting
and good.
And good and challenging and all of those things. Yes. So, yeah. Stay tuned. All right. Anyway, Vietnamese. So Lady Trieu gives this message to Angela, and then she says like something like, "Oh, I also know I have heard a similar proverb, which is it like tell him if he wants to tell me to come out and tell me something." She basically says like he can tell me himself or whatever. He can come talk to me himself. Wow. So Lady Trieu and Will are in some sort of cahoots here.
Right. Yes, that's what is implied, which is like funny because they come to Lady Trieu suspecting that her airships are what came and grabbed Angela's car. And the fact that actually may be the case is kind of so funny and on the nose.
Yeah.
It's kind of an outlandish accusation, and then for Trieu to just kind of essentially confirm it here.
Yes.
With their exchanges, very funny to me.
Yes, I completely agree. Okay, so we get that scene, and they leave politely, but you know that there's something else going on here. Then we pause to go to our own little paradise, which is the Adrian Veidt section of this show.
This is the best Veidt section of the show so far. I think. I don't know. The play is really good too.
Yes, it is. So Zach, why don't you take us through what we first see Veidt doing?
So we see him. He's out on a body of water in a little boat, and he has kind of like a, I guess kind of like a. It's not quite a net. It's more like a box.
It's almost like a crab trap. You ever got crabbing?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, that's I couldn't quite play. Yeah, it's like a crab trap, exactly. And so he's like lowering into the water and pulling out these underdeveloped fetuses.
Yes, but not just that. He pulls them out. He kind of looks at them, and some of them he just throws back.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, oh no, this one isn't what I want.
And I have to say,
weird. So weird.
We have the episodes we've seen. Some of them are marked as like works in progress, that they're not finished yet. And I don't know if those are the finished babies, but they're disturbing. Like they look
weird.
They look real but undercooked, and it's
yeah, like very small bodies, large heads. Yeah, it's really weird. You want to talk about what he's doing with the fetuses?
Yeah, so he gets a couple of these fetuses, and he brings them back to his place. He puts on some more 60s Jamaican music, Do Your Thing by Leroy Sibbles. I Shazammed it. And he puts him in this, like, spinning carousel thing.
He basically puts them in the microwave, essentially.
Yes. And then he presses a button, and you see it spin, and you hear these horrible noises coming from it.
So bad. Oh my gosh.
Terrifying noises. And then, ding! They're naked people. They grew into humans. He microwaved some humans.
It's Phillips and Crookshank.
Yeah. And he gets them dressed, and he tells them that, they should be able to understand at this point, but not speak for a few more hours. And so he says, I am your master, and everyone needs a purpose, and your purpose is to serve me. And then he brings them into the dining room, and we see, I mean, it's got to be 20 corpses?
Yeah, just, oh, yeah.
And he says, he basically says, sorry, I had a bad night.
Yeah, all of his clones, of course, dozens and dozens of dead clones, yeah.
Yes, and then there are two things that happen after this I want to talk about. First of all, somebody, I don't know if it's this Phillips or if it's later, but somebody hands him another horseshoe.
Right, which is we saw previously in the first episode when they hand him a horseshoe to cut the cake.
Yes, and he says, I don't need it yet. So something is going to
What in
happen
the
with the
world?
horseshoe. Yes, it's I
What in
don't
the
know what
world?
yet, but it's amazing. Okay, so then we go outside and we see them loading dead dead clones onto the biggest trebuchet you've ever seen. And then shooting it off, and the clones fly to a certain point and then just disappear into the sky.
Yep. He's on the island.
Well, it's very much lost. Can I tell you what my initial thought was?
Sure.
And I am 99.99999% sure this is bullshit. But I thought, oh, is he in Lady Trieu's like little geodesic dome there?
Yeah.
And he's like, and there's some sort of weird you know,
Like artificial reality type thing going on in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was one of my thoughts. I don't think that's the case, but that's just
Very
the idea
very
popped in my
Powers
head.
of 10 there.
Yes.
You know,
Yes,
with
absolutely.
the like year 1000 like biodome thing.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think that's really happening, but I thought I should mention it.
Well, it would make sense because Lady Trieu took over Veidt Industries or
Yes.
whatever Veidt's company was called. And
Yes.
so it would make sense for her to maybe have then either given him a kind of, like his own kingdom essentially, or maybe even, maybe it was a hostile takeover and she has him imprisoned.
Right.
And he's kind of testing his boundaries here.
We've heard terms of his there's a specific term I have it written down here. Terms of your captivity.
Yeah.
Something that the game master says, the game warden says to him. So, I don't know. Just something I thought of. But it's just this absolutely bonkers scene. And we do find out, by the way, that he's been there for 4 years. We find out. He says
yes,
that.
Yeah.
So yeah. A magnificent Veidt sequence. Just truly great. And we have to really
I think my favorite so far for sure.
Yeah. And Jeremy Irons is so over the top at all of these. But he's really doing great work.
He is, yeah, he is. And Ozymandias was never a character I cared for in the original Watchmen.
Same, yeah.
He very, very milquetoast until the very end where he is, he is a Republic serial villain. And then, but yeah, this interpretation of him by Irons is fantastic, and Irons is just the perfect casting choice for this, I think.
Yes, he is. In a series of what are perfect casting choices.
True.
We haven't talked a lot about that yet, but this show is impeccably cast.
Mm-hmm.
Just really, really wonderful stuff. All right. Anyway, so we are no longer in Veidt's little fiefdom there. We see Angela go home to Cal, and Cal is reading "Things Fall Apart," which is where the title of the episode comes from. That is a quote from the book. And Angela's trying to pick a fight because she's pissed off that she finds out that Cal spoke to Blake and Cal didn't tell her. And then Cal basically admits that he lied to Blake. He didn't say anything about the grandfather or any of that. That he just basically gives her Angela's version of the story.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something really interesting in this conversation here. And that's that she asks Cal, "Did you talk about your accident?" And Cal said it didn't come up. Any ideas as to what Cal's accident is?
Not a clue. Yeah, no idea.
I have none either. I don't know if we could have an idea based on what we know from Cal yet. But one of the things I keep thinking about as we watch this show is like there's every episode introduces all these new questions, and there's going to be no time to answer those questions this season.
You would think, especially since they're saying, I mean, I think it is still set at 9 episodes. I don't think they've said anything differently to contradict that.
No, IMDb says 9.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a lot being introduced here.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, after that, that's sort of the last scene we get with Cal and Angela. Anything else you want to say about that scene?
No, not in particular.
I do just want to reinforce how much I enjoyed their relationship.
Hmm.
And Cal seems like a truly decent person. And Cal seems like
Maybe the only one in the show so far.
yes, that is an excellent point. Uh, Cal definitely, and but there's a darkness to him. You know, there is, especially with his heaven description there. You sort of saw just a side of Cal we hadn't really seen before. But I really do
Hmm.
enjoy their relationship, and I look forward to seeing the relationship grow and change. So then we get the final scene of the episode, which is back at Lady Trieu's compound, and a couple of things happen here. First of all, we see her daughter wake up from a nightmare, and she disconnects herself from something.
Yeah, she has like an IV
Yeah.
in or something.
That instantly gave me shades of Inception,
Okay.
of just like, have you seen Inception?
I don't think I've seen it since it was in theaters,
Okay.
so it's been a long time.
In Inception, they like hook themselves up to this contraption that puts them to sleep, essentially.
Uh-huh.
uh, so they're not like naturally waiting to fall asleep to go into a dream. It
Yeah.
forces them into that. And I'm sure it's nothing to do with that, but that's just sort of the image I got of somebody waking up and unhooking themselves from this IV, reminded me of
Hmm.
Inception. But she has a nightmare, and she goes over and talks to Lady Trieu about it. And the nightmare essentially sounds like the scene of the comedian and Dr. Manhattan destroying the village in Vietnam, does it not?
Yeah, it's very similar.
Yeah. Um, and then she asks Lady Trieu to walk her back to bed, and Lady Trieu says no. Um, and
Very cold.
very
Not
cold.
not very maternal at
No.
all.
And then
Um,
who's sitting with Lady Trieu at this moment?
it's Will.
Yeah. And they have a conversation about Will's I guess commitment to this plan. She says that basically when family gets involved it gets tricky, and now that you've revealed yourself to Angela, are you going to be able to basically do your part in all of this? And he says, I am more in than ever. In 3 days she's going to find out and she's going to hate me, and you don't, basically don't doubt me. And then he stands up and
Yeah.
walks and goes to the sort of the porch area of her house or whatever it is, and starts going tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock.
So weird. I did that felt so on the nose.
Yes, it did.
Um, and I didn't know whether to like laugh or to take it seriously. Um, it almost felt like breaking the fourth wall at that point.
I had the exact same thought, is that this is them breaking the fourth wall, and I don't really know
Yeah.
why.
I mean, maybe he's Dr. Manhattan. I don't know.
Yeah, and then we get a truly great song, "Time Is on My Side," as the play out music for this week.
Hmm.
Whew.
Yeah, it was a good
What
episode.
It was a good episode, and it's funny because you can sort of, each episode so far after the pilot has had like a sort of a focus on a new character. Like the second episode is when we really get a lot of the Veidt stuff that happens. We see about the clones and all of that. The third episode is very much the Laurie episode, and this is very much the Lady Trieu episode. Even though we don't know much about her and we don't spend that much time with her, the time we spend with her is really important. Like it sets up a lot.
It really does. Yeah, yeah. She's a key character, and kind of in an antagonistic role right now. I kind of imagine she is going to not end up being a primary antagonist. I think that that's maybe a little too on the nose. She doesn't seem like a good person necessarily. Like I mentioned, the scene in the beginning, the way she treats her daughter. But I don't think that her intentions are nefarious necessarily.
No, and I think that she is very clearly the modern day Veidt equivalent. Not only
100%.
I mean, of course,
Yeah.
she buys his corporation, and so that's easy there. But just you get the idea of she has a vision for humanity that might take some breaking of eggs to get to, right? The old eggs omelet analogy there, and I don't think that that's certainly not the most moral way to approach change, but I think that it's you understand what I'm saying. Like
I
like
do.
you said,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think I don't think she is necessarily trying to bring evil or wrongdoing upon the world. I think she's trying to change it for the better, but just whatever that means doesn't mean what it might mean to you or me.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, you're very correct in calling out that she is the new Vite figure.
Mm-hmm.
But here in this point, we're getting that from the get go, whereas in the comic, Vite is not presented that way until the end.
Right. And I
Yeah.
think there's actually a really interesting conversation to maybe be had at the end of this episode about who are the various analogs on this show.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, it seems like Judd is clearly the comedian. He's killed in the first episode. The blood drips on his badge, right? Like, that's a very heavy-handed approach. Lady Trieu is obviously the Vite analog. Looking Glass is obviously set up to be the Rorschach analog. Um, is there anybody else that sort of fits into that box for you? Is there a clear Silk Spectre or Night Owl, or is Lady Night, Sister Night rather, uh, is she sort of both of them together?
I think that's pretty fair. I think she, yeah, I think that's actually pretty fair because she kind of highlights that kind of not really like reverence, but like willingness to enter into like vigilantism that is kind of embodied by Night Owl. Um, but at the same time, she's a little bit more tempered, I guess. A little more pragmatic and less idealistic, I think, than Night Owl was, which I think is where kind of the Silk Spectre influence comes in. Um, so yeah, I think that's pretty fair. She is kind of an avatar for just the vigilante in general.
Yeah. Um, is there anything that you particularly want to talk about with the rest of these episodes? With the rest of this episode before we wrap up?
No, I think that covers everything that I wanted to go over.
Yeah. So thank you for listening. I've been doing a recaps of the episodes every Monday morning after they air, and right after that on Multiversity you get our reviews as well, our podcast rather. And so we are I'm having a ton of fun talking about this show, and it's a really just super fun, super fascinating show to talk about. And we'll be back in a week's time. Did you write down the name of the next episode?
Um, I did not. I feel like it's on like the tip of my tongue though, but
I
no,
know.
I didn't.
Hang on, I'm looking at IMDb. Where can folks find you on Twitter, Zach?
I am at Wilker Fox.
And I am at Brian Needs a Nap, and let's see if they have put these episode names on IMDb yet.
I know that they're
Yes.
on Wikipedia.
Yes.
It's Little Fear of Lightning.
Little Fear of Lightning. Yes. So that is the name of the next episode. And yeah, we're out of time. So thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. Enjoy, everybody. Bye.